I could certainly see that throughout the supply chain, there was so many more pressures, challenges, opportunities that I really needed to understand so that in the future I could make far more strategic, informed decisions. We'll take this cob of corn, my lucky prop, as an example. As a retailer buyer, I would look at this piece of corn and I would want a good price. I would look at the availability and think, how many countries do I need to source from throughout the year to actually get this corn of good quality and a good price, good efficiency in the supply chain? And as a retailer buyer, I was probably at certain times only looking at a small number of these contributions that needed to be put in place to actually put this piece of corn on my supermarket shelf. I wanted to look at this piece of corn from many different perspectives. I've probably missed out quite a few here, but I wanted to look at this piece of corn from a grower's perspective. This piece of corn, as a grower, what did I want? So I've actually traveled over the last 7 months now to try to investigate some of those challenges that actually some other supermarket buyers may never see. So as a grower, I would want this piece of sweet corn to have a good germination rate, or I would want the seed to have a good germination rate. I would want the disease resistance to be pretty strong. I would want this husk to cover the top of the sweet corn to make sure that there was no bird damage or caterpillar infestation. As a marketer, I would want to make sure this piece of sweet corn had good size. I would want to make sure that there was no dehydration on the cobs. And as a customer, ultimately, I would want it all. I would need to consider, the customer doesn't really need to consider, but the customer needs all of these considerations to be equally important to make sure this piece of corn is the most efficient piece of corn that we can get to get a good price. So I started my journey in an office, just like that, about 30 miles outside of London, and I was purchasing fresh produce on a daily basis. I was purchasing the fresh produce behind my desk on a spreadsheet. I was living in the Excel world, and it made my brain numb to the fresh produce industry, which actually was such a fascinating industry. I just felt like I needed to touch, rather than actually working in a virtual fresh produce industry from behind my desk in Bracknell. So I was jumping the fence from retailer to grower. My journey's taken me from California back in May. I spent 3 months working on a farm in Southern California, to Senegal in West Africa, which I've just returned from, and to South Africa this coming January for 3 months. One thing I had to do is be very clear with the businesses that I was going to work for. I didn't want to sit back and observe the industry. I really wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to work the 10-hour shifts that all of their workers were working. I wanted to work in the pack house. I wanted to work in the harsh heat of Senegal, picking chilies on my knees. I wanted to do everything that anyone in the supply chain was doing to experience that fresh produce firsthand. I was met with a few raised eyebrows. Obviously, I wasn't wearing a dress. I was wearing jeans. I was ready for a good day's work, but it was quite challenging to convince a lot of the people that I knew in the industry that actually that's what I wanted to do for the next year. So one thing I wanted to do when I entered into the fresh produce supply chain, I wanted to make sure I was sharing my experiences with the wider industry. So I now write for Fresh Produce UK, another one of Jim's businesses, exploring some of the the interesting challenges, opportunities that I have seen, and trying to relate them back into current industry issues. So this is where I started, at Apricot Lane Farms in Southern California. Some of you might have heard of Apricot Lane. They're an absolutely fascinating farming business. They actually started quite unconventionally. The joint owners of the farm are actually a film producer and a private chef. Molly, who's the private chef, was chefing for Tom Cruise, and And John, the film producer, was producing many films all over the world. But actually, it's a really interesting combination of people who weren't necessarily involved in the fresh produce supply chain 3 years back, but actually now they've got a very fascinating business and they look at things completely differently to a lot of other people in the industry. Their films actually are aired on Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul Sunday very frequently and actually get good agricultural practice across to thousands of people or millions of people across the world. Doing some of the most repetitive tasks at Apricot Lane, like clearing out the chickens or spreading fertilizer, hand weeding pastures, was actually some of the most intellectually stimulating. I was coming up with challenges in the industry that I hadn't had time to think about in my day job at Waitrose. I was coming up with challenges I really wanted to talk about with industry experts. And this year has really allowed me to contact these people and actually really get embedded in the industry where I wouldn't have had that opportunity sat behind a desk. As well as being superb marketeers, at Apricot Lane Farms, they were actually the most passionate people I've ever met about soil health. They really embraced one of my favorite statements over the last few months, which is soil is more important than oil. Wes Jackson, who works for the Land Institute in the States, recently said this, and actually it's a really nice statement. It just really puts things into context about how important our soils are. Apricot Lane Organic Farm, and they're actually running as a biodynamic farm at the moment, but soil is really at the heart of their business. Their belief is that a healthy soil is capable of providing high-quality, nutrient-dense food, whilst improving land quality, building resilience, and ultimately creating a more productive farming business and community. Soil is one of the key building blocks on the farm, and really delivers most of the ecosystem services that they require. But thinking about this as a buyer, I was faced with a challenge to myself. How can I make sure that the growers that I'm working with are as passionate as John and Molly about soil health, about all of these environmental aspects that I had flowing through my mind? And it got me thinking. But it got me thinking of a concept that's actually already being used, but I just wanted to talk to you about it today. So working for Waitrose, an upmarket, employee-owned retailer in the UK, we have about 300 stores. I've been lucky enough that making my purchasing decisions on a daily basis, I've really been supported by my management team to source from the best growers, from the most sustainable growers, and from high-quality growers all around the world. But I was thinking more that it is very, very difficult to identify who those growers are, but more importantly, what attributes makes a grower sustainable. You could go on forever, and there's so many different opinions about what actually makes or creates sustainability. And that's one of the things that I wanted to investigate further. What if we could look at growers and look at trends about how growers were finding challenges in the industry? So if we looked at the challenges that they were having agronomically, broad range of challenges, and then we group them together. So from 2,000 growers or more, if we looked at growers from Peru, from Brazil, from Peru, from Australia, and actually looked at all of those challenges together and looked at trends, shared those trends with retailers, and then fed we fed the trends into the researchers. And the researchers were then more targeted about the research that they were focusing on. Then the researchers feeding those trends back to the growers, actually creating a really positive feedback loop. That was something that we looked at putting into practice at Waitrose a few years ago. And we've created a grower assessment from a concept to not an audit. It's an assessment of challenges to try to create these trends, to really focus research going forward. But it's an interesting way of looking at things, and it actually really, I mean, everything's not going to happen quickly, but actually it's an interesting way of looking at the industry in a new light to try to really promote good practice. These are some of the questions that I was thinking about when I was picking chilies, or when I was going around collecting eggs, when I was working hands-on in some of the growers over the last 7 months. The second part of my year was a short period of study at UC Davis. I wanted to make sure that when I was looking at post-harvest technology, I was the most up-to-date I could ever be in terms of new post-harvest technologies, trends, and any research. So when I was driving up the Central Valley towards Sacramento, I could not help but noticing some of the billboards that were posing the question, is growing food wasting water? But actually, then I tried to look at the billboards a bit differently. Rather than looking at the water availability in California, I was looking at how much water is actually wasted throughout the supply chain through post-harvest losses. So actually, is growing food wasting water was actually one of the key reasons I was traveling up to UC Davis in the first place. I really wanted to minimize those post-harvest losses and find out how I could do it from a retailer, but then also as a grower, as a marketer, and as a packer. As we know, fresh produce is easily damaged. It's got a high water content and is extremely diverse in terms of genetics, tissue, physiological state, and it's ultimately still alive post-harvest. I want to take this cob of corn, this good prop, as an example again. It's quite interesting looking at this cob of corn. You've got the husk, which is a brilliant protection on transit. You ultimately want this husk to cover the top of the corn as well, to actually protect it from any bird damage, any insect damage, as I mentioned before. Once you've taken off this husk, you can if the cob isn't long enough, you can break it in two. And actually then you can produce cobettes. To preserve this cob of corn, you can use MAP packaging and technology. If the respiration rate changes of this piece of corn over time, because of weather or because of any other environmental impacts, you can actually change the respiration rate you can change the MAP film according to the respiration rate of the film to actually extend the shelf life, ultimately saving water and minimizing waste. But another interesting thing I wanted to mention was that the company that I was working for out in Senegal, this husk, the ends of the sweet corn, was actually their biggest waste stream a few years ago. And over the last few years, they've heavily invested in biodigesters. And actually, now this waste product is not waste, but fuel. And actually, it's used for the powering of 3,000 homes, 800 acres of liquid fertilizer, and fuels the whole factory. So actually turning a basic waste product into fuel has been a fascinating journey for Barfoot's in the UK. I wanted to mention this corn once again. I won't get you bored of this piece of corn. And we've heard today about a similar story, looking at how we can really benefit the local community, not hinder it, whilst growing our fresh produce. So over the last 3 months, I've been out in Senegal, and it's surprised me how the purchase of one piece of sweet corn in the UK in the winter months can actually benefit a community of over 10,000 people. SCL are based approximately 40 minutes outside of Saint Louis in Senegal. They're a very, very rural grower. They're growers of sweet potatoes, chilies, green beans, and zucchini. And the business started 10 years ago. I actually visited the business 7 years ago to go and approve the produce coming into the UK market, it was a fascinating journey to travel back 7 years later to visit a farm that had tripled in size and diversed massively in crop type. It was a brilliant 3 months to spend there. But what I wanted to talk about today is the impact that they've had on the local community, which has been really fascinating to me. To promote good education, SCL have supported 8 schools to date, schools like this one here. They actually built the classroom just behind the children. And there's unfortunately a big problem with schooling in Senegal. Education is compulsory up until the age of 16, but actually primary school attendance is only 47%. So helping in terms of the infrastructure, the water supply, and the state of the classrooms has really promoted good education in the middle of rural Senegal. In many communities, there's problems with potable water. Unfortunately, waterborne disease is a major cause of health problems in the area as well. SCL then helped to improve this potable water supply and supplied water to over 12 villages, 30 hamlets, and changed the lives of many of the communities. But they haven't done this because they need to do it. They haven't done it because a retailer has asked them to do it. Their business has been built with the community, and you can truly see that when you visit them in Senegal. So this is a very positive story of where one product can actually make a real positive difference to a community. But what I really wanted to get across to you today was actually, whatever industry you're in, looking at things differently and looking at other people's perspectives is such an important part of the way to work. I mean, I found this personally very, very useful, to be able to understand parts of the supply chain that I would never normally get to explore. It's been a fascinating 7 months for me and really broadened my view of the fresh produce supply chain. I wanted to leave you with 2 quotes. Derek Silvers said when presenting at TED, "I didn't know I would have to travel to the other side of the world to realize assumptions that I never knew I had, and realize the opposite of them may also be true." And that was exactly true for me. You don't realize that you've got some of these assumptions until you're there, picking chilies in 110 degree heat, in 100% humidity in the middle of Senegal. It's made me open up my eyes to the fresh produce industry in ways that I'd never think I could have done, sat behind a desk in head office of Waitrose. I'll leave you with this one quote today. "If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change," by Wayne Dyer. And over the last 7 months, again, this has been a fascinating time for me, and this has been very, very true. But thank you for listening, and enjoy the evening. Thanks. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, of course.
Do we have some questions? Someone must want to know about Senegal or organic apricot farms. Someone. Oh, there we have.
Sabrina from Fresh on Board. Two-parted question, easy though. One, you said that you were writing an article in the UK version of Produce News. Are you also writing a blog? And second, are you planning to go back to your job at Waitrose when you get back to the UK after you come back from South Africa? And if that's the case, do you plan to implement different methods of using the system for other people that actually are working virtually, which was what you were doing before?
Right, so the first one, I started working for Produce Business UK just earlier this year. It was the first time I'd ever written anything down publicly. It's been a bit of a challenge, but actually it's become really enjoyable. I haven't written a blog, but I've actually, because I've been writing for Produce Business UK, I've been writing down 10 times more than I'd ever write down to actually record what I was doing to be able to create articles. So now I really enjoy it, and I definitely consider writing more in the future. But at the moment, I'm just writing for Produce Business UK, and it's about a monthly article. In terms of my plans after South Africa, is yes, I'm still employed by Waitrose. I've just taken this 1 year to get some different experience, and it's experience that they wouldn't have been able to offer me within the company. But yeah, I mean, some of the decisions that I make going forward are actually going to be far easier. But actually, a lot of the decisions that I make going forward are going to be far more complex. But I think hopefully it will make my decisions more strategic, definitely more long-term. And hopefully it will just keep my momentum in the industry going in terms of keeping my mind open to new ideas, because that's what this has done ultimately.
Hello, Sergio Borges from Campus Borges. Just First, thank you very much for the presentation. And have you seen all of the projects of like the school and working in Senegal replicate into more? I mean, it seems like an extraordinary project. Have you seen that to propagate in any way?
Do you mean solely in Senegal or across other countries?
Or any other country? It seems it was driven by a UK, as I understood, right? UK market?
No, it was, the Senegalese project was definitely just driven in Senegal. The UK market, of course, want that way of working, but actually the project itself was very much driven by the business that created SCL. They started the business in collaboration with the community, and it was probably one of the closest collaborations that I'd ever seen. The workers that work for SCL, some of the workers had never actually worked before. So there was a lot of support that was being put into the community to be able to explain how the work needed to be done. So it was immediate training, but then there was also a lot of support given to the community for healthcare reasons to try to promote drinking potable water rather than using the water from the river. So I think that the way that they've done things in Senegal is very unique. But I've also seen some great other ways of working across the world. But the schools project was very specific to the Senegalese structure, where as the business has grown, they've recruited daily workers from various villages. Initially, it was just one or two. Initially, it was quite interesting. 7 years ago when I visited, there was actually some problems with the workers saying that there was migrants working, and they all went on strike. And it was interesting because the management team didn't understand why they thought there was migrants, because there weren't any migrants working. But actually, they meant the people from the next door village. So there was lots of deep passion about people needing to be employed by the immediate villages, and it being very fair and very even. So I think it's difficult to answer your question. The Senegalese way of setting up the support of the community was quite unique and quite special. It was very different to where I've seen it been done over other countries.
I might have missed this, you might have already answered it, but when you had these moments of enlightenment or understanding that you were pursuing and you were getting it, and then you went back and had the opportunity to communicate and express some of your findings to the people that you might have reported to before you left. What were their impressions, and did you feel, if you've gotten that part done, and did you get the feeling or the sense that they were equally impressed and equally excited to the point where they would perhaps have you come in and help train, the other buyers and help them get a feel for what you learned so that others could benefit from your experience?
I've had different experiences with people's reactions so far, to be honest. I found it fascinating going further down the supply chain and actually trying to understand things in far greater detail. But I suppose other people work differently. Going back into the retailer that I work for in the UK, I've had very positive receptions. People are fascinated about what I've done. But it has really differed depending on who I've spoken to. I haven't set up any training, or I haven't been asked to set up any training so far. But then I haven't actually formally gone back to work. I won't be going back into the business until April 2017. I've got the South Africa part of my journey yet to come. But I mean, it would be great to have that response. But I think it really does differ between different people in the industry and people with different roles. Like Jim was saying, many technical managers are very fascinated with the intricacies of the supply chain, and that was exactly where I was coming from. But certain other roles may not find that interest, or might not need that interest to really perform well in their role. So I think it really depends on the role within the retailer or the supplier to whether that interest has been there or not. But ultimately, there's a lot of people who are very passionate about fresh produce in the industry, And I found all of those people to be fascinated about what I was doing.
Hi, Rebecca Beatty from Newcastle University. I just wanted to know, we've heard earlier in the day about the corporate social responsibility. Implement this, to continue.
So it's a question. It's around social responsibility. Is that right? Sorry,
Yes,
just
so
repeat.
to keep with the helping the community, building the community.
Yeah, I mean, at Waitrose, we really encourage sourcing from the most sustainable growers, the most socially responsible growers, and have got a number of schemes in place to make sure that this is being promoted. At Waitrose specifically, we actually have a foundation which supports growers all over the world, specifically in Kenya, South Africa, and Ghana. Every penny of certain packs of produce actually go directly back into a pot, which is then reinvested in social programs. So there's different schemes that we've got in place as a retailer, but ultimately I find it an interesting subject, and especially how that pot of money is being spent for the future and how that pot of money can be spent more sustainably is a fascinating area for me to work on in the future, definitely.
I've got a question. What did you find to be the most interesting difference between a farm that's obviously very well funded and very well marketed? You said the Apricot farm's been open. I've seen the videos and it looks amazing. It's like a haven. It's crazy. Compared to the Senegalese farm that you said is not shouting about its corporate social responsibility and is not funded by retailers. So what did you find to be the most, I suppose, shocking difference? And
they were really chalk and cheese. You've got it spot on.
Of course.
Apricot Lane Farms has got a lot of funding, although they have to work within constraints, but they are ultimately a farm. They are an LA farm, and they're a beautiful farm to go and have a look around. The videos really say it all. It was interesting, one of the reasons I wanted to go to Apricot Lane in the first place wasn't necessarily about the farming, it was about the marketing. They were marketing things within the industry that I'd never seen marketed in that way. Being able to get an Emmy for one of your short films is something that I'd never heard been done in the industry before. So actually, my fascination with them was really around the marketing. Day-to-day farm work was actually really similar with both of them. Obviously, in Senegal, they've got 1,000 hectares. They're on a massive scale. They've obviously got a lot more workers than the daily workers in California. But the farm work was the same. It was hard work. It was a 6-day week. Ultimately, both businesses had very similar beliefs. They were really trying to promote the environment. They were really trying to promote the importance of soil and create farms for the future. So although they were chalk and cheese, their beliefs were actually really aligned, which was nice to see, but also interesting to think about, because from two different sides of the world, actually the beliefs were really very similar.
I'll ask you a question, Amy. You've worked with Waitrose, and for those not familiar, the Americans who are not familiar with it, it's a very upscale chain, experiential in its way. As you say, deeply involved in social responsibility, foundation, things of this sort. But the vast majority of the industry in the world is not actually like Waitrose. That's kind of like Disneyland. What do you think the response would be if you have friends or things who've worked at less upscale, people more focused on getting the price the cheapest possible and things of that sort? What do you think their response would be to this kind of journey?
It's been positive. I started my career at Tesco, and I've got many friends and colleagues at various different retailers in the US or the UK, and people have been positive. Although, I suppose if you take post-harvest technology, a lot of clever post-harvest work can actually drive efficiency. So ultimately, my journey was as much about looking at quality as looking at efficiency, as looking at technology for the future. looking at the different perspectives has been so useful, but I think it's so instrumental for good industry growth in terms of getting the efficiency there and actually getting the understanding of every level of the supply chain. So I think it's just as relevant for a retailer as Waitrose as it may be for, in the UK, Tesco or Asda or Ocado. I think it can be just as relevant to any industry as well. Just understanding more about the industry you're working in, I think I've found to be very, very useful.
All right, do we have one more question?
Are you familiar with the program Undercover Boss?
No.
where a CEO goes into basically undercover in his own company, unknown, to find out, issues within his company. But what you've done is gone out into the supply chain to experience it. You brought up Disney. Disney has a best practice of the highest guys go out and sell popcorn in Disneyland and things like that. Do you, after your experience, you're kind of halfway in, would you see benefit from doing the same thing within the UK, spending a day, at the cash register, in the clerk, pushing trolleys, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, massively. I think one good example, actually, that I think should be done more is actually we're all the time as retailers talking about the specification and getting the specification right. But the best way of me thinking about the specification, if you, for example, a chili, was picking that chili and actually packing that chili, standing on the production line, but not only for a day, maybe packing it for a day, but then picking it for a day and having to do the whole day, not just a stint of 5 minutes. I mean, first of all, people thought that was bizarre that I wanted to do that, but actually really trying to understand the product, that's what you've got to do. So yeah, it's been massively beneficial to me, but then the more I learn, the more I see that I need to learn. So I think, I mean, it can't go on forever. I need to go back to work. But actually, it's been a massive benefit to me, and I think it will change my way of looking at things in the future. But I would definitely recommend it to anyone.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks,
I really
Jim.
appreciate it.